I know John's going to open up the program, but I do want to share that I'm definitely remiss that we are not down there visiting. It is always one of the highlights of Father Deveron and my travels together, which is to come down to Florida. To actually wear shorts in January is always a positive, and be with all of you, and actually, breaking bread and having a glass of wine and just hearing your stories. So there, from that perspective, I'm glad we're able to get together in this virtual way. And I am looking forward to the day that we can hop on a plane again easily and not have to worry about quarantines and tests and all that stuff, and be visiting with all of you again down there.
Hey, Jose, this is Dennis Fitzsimons. We might trade you temperature and location for a few years of age.
Well, we all have bartering can occur later on. We could figure that all out later on. So okay. we can definitely work on that. But thank you all once again for that. And I want to thank Desi Heathwood, Jim Milliken, and Bob James for being our hosts. You traditionally would be opening up your homes, your clubs, your boat to us. And so this is a great opportunity to have you all together. But John, I'll let you kick off from there. So.
Thanks, Jose. And just to reiterate what Jose said, everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're certainly disappointed that we can't be down there in person, and I think last year we were all hopeful that we might be able to see you all. But despite of that, we're still able to gather together as an alumni community, albeit in a little different way than what we're used to. But grateful to be able to get everyone together. We've done a couple of these before, some small alumni events virtually, and they've worked out pretty well. So we're glad to be able to welcome you all to this one. We have a great program for you guys today. Father Deveron, you can see he's joined us, and he'll be giving you an update on the prep, how things are going here, especially how the prep is handling COVID-19. And we're proud to be one of a few schools in New York City and in New York State that's been successfully able to return to in-person learning and maintain a healthy and safe environment for the faculty, staff, and students. And then we also have special for this year and something we look forward to doing in the future, Mr. Brian Pinter from the Preps faculty, religious studies faculty, who has a short presentation that we'll give to you once we've talked about how things are going here at the Prep. So I welcome both of them. I welcome all of you. Thank you again for joining us. And at this point, I'll hand it off to Father Deveron, and he'll let you know how things are going in a little more detail here at the Prep.
Hi, everybody. Great to be with you virtually. Though, as both Jose and John have said, I'd prefer to be with you physically. I thought we could start with just a poem that will serve as an opening prayer for us. I've been drawing a lot of consolation, and I know Bob James, you'll appreciate this, from Pope Francis's new book. It's "Let Us Dream: The Path to a Better Future," and the book describes the Pope's reasons for finding hope, specifically during this time of pandemic. And the book ends with a poem, and the title of the poem is "Hope," and it's appropriately written by Alexis Valdez. It was originally written in Spanish, appropriate because Alexis lives in Miami. He's a Cuban actor and comedian, and somebody sent this poem to Pope Francis, and I think it describes many of our sentiments, as well as our hopes in this time of great challenge. So here's the poem. The poem says, "Hope. When the storm is past and the roads are tamed, and we are the survivors of a collective shipwreck, with tearful heart and our destiny blessed, we will feel joy simply for being alive. And we'll give a hug to the first stranger and praise our good luck that we kept a friend. And then we'll remember all that we lost and finally learn everything we never learned. And we'll envy no one for all of us have suffered and will not be idle, but more compassionate. We'll value more what belongs to all than what was earned. We'll be more generous and much more committed. We'll understand how fragile it is to be alive. We'll sweat empathy for those still with us and those who are gone. We'll miss the old man who asked for a buck in the market, whose name we never knew, who was always at your side. And maybe the poor old man was God in disguise, but you never asked his name because you never had the time. And all will become a miracle, and all will become a legacy, and will respect the life we have gained. When the storm passes, I ask you, Lord, in shame, that you return us better as you once dreamed us. So that's the poem, and I think it describes the challenges that we all face in this collective moment. It has been quite an interesting time at Fordham Prep over the last really since March. We made a decision last spring that we would organize our entire school around 3 pillars. We would organize the finances and everything we do operationally around, first and foremost, health and safety. Second, we wanted to preserve our enrollment, knowing that this would be challenging given job loss and the need for additional financial aid. I'll say more about that in a minute. And then third, we wanted to be able to keep our faculty and our staff employed. We did not want to, if we could avoid furloughs and unpaid furloughs and layoffs, we wanted to endeavor to do that. So that's been what we've done, and I'm really proud to say that we've been able to have roughly 70% of the students who want to come to in-person classes, have them in the building every day. I say want to because we did give parents a choice, students and parents a choice, and at the very beginning in August, about 80% of our parents and students wanted to have that in-person experience. That has now drifted to a little under 75%. And the reasons why parents and students would not want to be here in person, as you can imagine, are diverse. Some families live with an extended family member who is elderly and or immunocompromised. Other parents are, I would say, perhaps more risk sensitive to their sons traveling, commuting, and what that what kind of risk that might bring. So that's been our experience in terms of the numbers. One of the things that has happened, the experience of talking to students, is that they're so excited to actually be attending school in person. And I sometimes have to check them. I have to check their enthusiasm, because it's almost hard to believe that students would love to come to school. And by the way, they're coming to school not to play sports, because sports are largely inactive this year. A lot of the fun community building dimensions, aspects of our mission, we simply can't we can't sponsor. So they're really coming to school for the bare minimum, to sit in classes in which they are 6 feet apart, wearing a mask, smaller cohorts, to learn. And so they're telling us that they took a lot for granted in terms of how important it is to have that in-person experience. And they, last March we were completely remote for the entire rest of the school year. So this school year, to have students back in the building, back on campus, is a tremendous gift, and they're experiencing it as a gift as well. Our faculty are also highly committed to being present in person. We offered faculty the opportunity for accommodations if they have particular health needs, and of our faculty of 88, we've had, I could count on one hand the number of faculty that have come forward and said that they have a particular accommodation and they would rather teach from home. So it really is the essence of the mission that we see demonstrated every day, that teacher-student relationship and students bonding around their love for learning, that is sustaining us during these times. There aren't many innovations, frankly, from our strategic plan that we've been able to introduce at the prep this year, because we've really had to focus on those three pillars. And so, health and safety, there's a comprehensive daily health screening that every student has to practice before they come to school. It's all done on a software app, and their parent has to sign off that they're healthy that day. So you can imagine some of the challenges and distractions that we've had to endure, which frankly has put a lot of other strategic initiatives on the back burner. In terms of what this means for us as a school in terms of our finances, Fordham Prep has always been a school that has robust middle class. And frankly, that's the group that we're seeing hardest hit right now in the New York area. We've always been, the prep has always been a community that has small business owners as families, food and beverage is always a big proportion of the families represented at the prep. So we have had to make available a roughly $1 million in additional financial aid this year. And we did that by implementing an austerity budget for the year. But it's been challenging. It's been extremely challenging. We had to suspend our faculty, the TIA benefit that our faculty has grown accustomed to, and it makes the prep a great place to work and puts us in terms of our compensation, makes our compensation very competitive. And you can imagine that faculty were not happy about that, and they're still not happy about it. Our hope is that if we continue to manage the finances in the prudent way that we're doing, we're going to be able to bring that back. Fordham Prep applied for and received a PPP loan in the amount of $2.2 million. That loan, administered through the Small Business Association, should be fully forgivable. But when you're dealing with the federal government, you can't really count on anything. So our CFO, we've retained consultants to help us apply for that loan, and now we're in the position of applying for forgiveness. If we get that loan forgiven, we're going to be in much better financial footing to be able to restore our TIA benefit from our teachers. We have seen tremendous generosity from prep alumni, and many of you on this call have been flexible and generous with your own commitments, increasing those commitments, allowing us to perhaps use those commitments for current use rather than for the designation and the restriction that you had originally made that gift for a particular intention. And that's been extremely helpful to us as well. So we're hoping to get through the year unscathed here. One of the challenges we face in New York State is that the quarantine regulations for schools are onerous, and they're so onerous and so binding that even though all of our faculty and students are sitting 6 feet away, they're all wearing masks. If one student in one class tests positive, that really puts all of the classes that that student is in, as well as all the teachers, puts them all in quarantine. And just after the Christmas break, we came back for a week, and then the next week we were in a position of having so many faculty quarantines that we had to all pivot to distance learning. So that was quite a bit of a challenge, and that's kind of the way it's going to be until vaccinations speed up. I will say I'm extremely happy that after the first week and a few days, I'm estimating about 60% of our faculty already have the first shot of the vaccination. We created an incentive program, so rather than my telling everybody that I'm allowed by law, which I am, to require the vaccine, we decided to incentivize that vaccine by giving a stipend to faculty to receive it. That way, they share the information with us, and we can ensure that they are getting those vaccines as soon as possible. So that's what's happening as well. I will share one strategic item that we introduced. I think you'll get a kick out of it. In our senior economics course, for a long time, the faculty member who teaches that has wanted to, instead of just do an endowment simulation exercise with those students, these are some of our brightest students in the senior year, has wanted to actually manage part of the endowment. So our finance and investment committee last year approved that that we would give $100,000 to the senior economics honors economics class, and with guidance from their teacher, as well as meetings with the investment committee, they would actually be able to invest that money that is in our endowment. I'm really proud to say that they made $27,000. So that's really that's a tremendous record for them, and that was last year's class, and now this year's senior economics class is reinvesting those earnings. The Preps endowment, I think you've seen some of the informatics that we sent you, some of the data. So certainly happy to take questions on what you've read about the Prep. Hopefully you received the most recent RAMView. You may have questions from RAMView, but basically we're at your service. And if you have questions, love to engage in a bit of a dialogue. So I will pause here, and looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I'm just going to jump in quickly. Thank you all for your questions. But I want to make sure we're able to continue with our program, and we'll have time for a few more questions at the end. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Brian Pinter from the Preps Religious Studies Department. He has a short presentation for us. As he said to me earlier, one of his favorite talks to give. So I think we're in for something pretty special. So Brian, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Certainly, thank you. And my thanks to all of you for the opportunity to be here with you today to share this little spiritual reflection, but also to share your connection to your alma mater. I grew up in the Philadelphia area, and I went to St. Joseph's Prep. So I understand the value and the connection that we have to our Jesuit prep schools. I also want to say I appreciate your support for the Prep. The school does a lot of good. It really has a major positive impact on these boys' lives, and I realize that we are standing on your shoulders, the faculty and all of us who are part of the school and the students. So please know my gratitude for that. By way of brief introduction, I'm broadcasting to you from Riverdale in the Bronx, where I live with my wife and my two sons. My boys go to St. Gabriel's School. They're in 7th and 6th grade. Yes, we have some neighborhood people with us. I heard Riverdale mention. As I said, I grew up in the Philadelphia area. I also went to St. Joseph's University and then on to Fordham for graduate school. I also did graduate studies at the General Theological Seminary of the Episcopal Church. I also studied at Fairfield University, where I earned a certificate in spiritual direction. This is my second year at Fordham Prep, teaching in religious studies. I also do some work at my parish, St. Ignatius Loyola in Manhattan. I'm a pastoral associate there, so I help with some adult religious ed retreats and spiritual direction, things like that. So I'd like to share with you today a talk I like to give. It's called A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life. A couple of preliminary notes. I have a set of notes that I'm going to share with you on the screen share, and I'd be happy to send these to John. And if you would like a copy, he could email them to you. I have found with adult learners, they like to be able to see the map. They want to see the notes. So I'm going to share with you all the notes that I'm using. And if you want to review them, share them with somebody else, that's fine. Feel free to forward it. For my remarks, I'm drawing on the work of some well-known contemporary spiritual writers. Father Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan. Father Ronald Rollheiser, who is an oblate of Mary Immaculate. Thomas Merton. I think we all know Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk. And perhaps the most important influence in my thinking on what I'm going to present, and in a lot of my work, even in the work I do at Fordham Prep, is Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist. I think that Jung was one who had one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, and he had a lot of insight into the mystery of the human soul. That's just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from and my sources for this. So I'm going to put on the screen share my notes. I'll work through my presentation, and then at the end, if anyone has a question or something I can clarify, that might be the best way. I'll get through this, and then we can take questions and any comments. Okay. Okay, so here we are. A spirituality for the two halves of life. Just a few introductory reflections on this. I feel that right now, with the pandemic and a number of other crises that we're facing in our country and our world, history has moved us into a kairos moment. And what I mean by that is we're in a time out of ordinary time. The Greeks referred to the normal progression of things as chronos time. But every once in a while, history would send a moment that was going to be a time apart. And we're in that right now. We're in a kairos moment. That's a different kind of time. A crisis like this presents us with an opportunity to make some intentional choices about what kind of future we're going to create. I think we can either make the choice to become conscious of what's going on and recognize that God's grace is at work right now in our world, and we can make a choice to cooperate with that. And if we don't do that, we will simply fall unconsciously into the future. And I don't think that's what we want. My point is that each of us has a role to play in this task of cooperating with God's grace. So to that end, I've built these reflections on how we can attend to certain spiritual tasks that we face as we go through our lives. Spiritual questions that we're invited to hold and to wrestle with. And as we journey through life, we also see that there are different gifts that we bring in different life stages. So above all, my hope for this, my thesis here, my objective is to recognize that the historical moment that we're in now is calling for wisdom. We need wise elders. And when I say elders, that's not an age, elder with a capital E. Men and women who have the wisdom of life experience, who are discerning people, reflective people, who are doing their spiritual work and can role model this for others. In my notes, I say their role model for others: maturity, wholeness, healing, and wisdom. I think our Jesuit schools are well positioned to serve this task because discernment is a part of our charism. That's a part of what we teach and how we teach. And men like yourselves who come from this tradition, you have the wisdom and the experience and perspective of your lives now, and that's worth something because it's been tested by time. And your opinions are valuable. Your wisdom is based on your experience. And now you're well positioned to role model what it means to be a mature, whole, healing, wise man for the world. So let's talk about the two halves of life. The two halves of life is not an age. It's not determined by age. There can be people who are well into their 70s, but are still in the first half of life, first half of life, thinking and acting. You could also go to a children's cancer ward and you will find people who are in the second half of life. They're holding second half of life questions. They have second half of life wisdom. So this is more about how we've attended to certain spiritual tasks that life sends us. It's what we take our identity in. It's what are our essential struggles. That's what determines which half of life we're in. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, each stage has distinctive spiritual tasks and gifts. And also each half of life has its own set of rules, which is to say, there are certain questions and certain tasks that we have to take up. And there's a different discipline with which we approach those. And the program that we were using in the first half of life is not going to work in the second half of life. The program for the first half of life is not going to work in the second half of life. The first half of life, we could say, is about getting your life together, what we might call essential discipleship. And the second half of life is about giving your life away, generative discipleship, or we could even call it radical discipleship. The Greek author Nicos Kazanstakis, he's most famous for his book, The Last Temptation of Christ, which of course was the movie as well. He also has a semi-autobiographical work. I think it was his last one. It was called Report to Greco. He tells this wonderful story where as a youth, he spent a summer on Mount Athos, the Greek monastery island. And he had a conference with one of the elderly monks. And I'm just going to read to you something he said. I have this in my other notes here. He says, I asked the old monk, Father, do you still do battle with the devil? And the old monk replied, no. I used to when I was younger, but now I've grown old and tired, and the devil has grown old and tired with me. I leave him alone, and he leaves me alone. So your life is easy then, replied Kazanstakis. Oh no, replied the monk. It's much worse, because now I wrestle with God. And I think that's a great metaphor for these two halves of life. In the first half, we wrestle with the devil. In Greek, it's diabolos for the devil. And that's an energy that divides us. It wants to take us in a million directions at once. But in the second half of life, we wrestle with God. And that can be defined by the call to forgive, the call to let go of resentment and anger, the call to dethrone ourselves, no longer the need for achievement, no longer the need to be the center of attention. That's what God calls us to, and I'll talk more about that in my presentation. Let's talk about the tasks of the first half of life. And perhaps as we go through these, you might see your children or your grandchildren in some of these. I think that's one of the potentially helpful parts of this little reflection is that we can name some of the things that are going on, and it might help us to understand others and ourselves a little bit better and help us to serve as mentors and provide wisdom as we see what people are going through. We understand the struggles of their station in life a little bit better. The tasks of the first half of life. The first one, integrating eros. When I talk about eros, I mean the sheer pulse for life. Plato, the Greek philosopher, says we're fired into life with a madness that comes from the gods. Now notice he doesn't say, well, when we're born, we're gently placed in the crib. He says, no, we're fired into life. So we all have this raw energy in us, and it takes a discipline to bring order to it and to help us to channel it in a productive way so that it doesn't burn us up. We do see lots of young people who aren't able to develop that discipline, and the energy in some way does burn them up. And we can imagine the many ways that happens. And sometimes it happens in really tragic ways. It might end in people falling into drugs or crime or chaos or whatever the case might be. So that's one of our struggles, bringing discipline to this energy. We have this energy because we're human. That's what it means to be made the image and likeness of God. In the Hebrew scriptures, God is seen as fire, and fire is raw energy. The energy is godly, but it's huge and powerful in a way it's beyond us. And part of our struggle is to be able to carry it with some kind of integrity. We see this in children. I remember when my two were babies, they would want to put everything in their mouth. They just want to take all of life in, everything goes in the mouth. Teenagers, they want to stay up all night, absorbing everything, watching YouTube videos, talking to each other. So it's that sheer power, that sheer energy. And this comes from God. God embraces the whole world and infuses it with God's own energy. I think this is why religion for teenagers, it needs color and life. Because one of the things that they're struggling with, one of their challenges is constant restlessness and what they call FOMO. That means fear of missing out. As in, is there something better going on that I could be doing right now? So when we're engaging them, when we're approaching them, we have to be very engaging, because that's where they are in their life. They need something that's going to hold their attention and draw their interest. And I don't fault them for this when they get distracted, because that's a part of their task, is learning how to discipline that, because inside that they're being pulled in a million different directions. They need mentors to help them hold this energy. I think that's part of what parents and grandparents and teachers and other mentors in their lives can role model for them. In the first half of life, we struggle with loneliness and intimacy. Learning the ways of intimacy takes time. I remember a funny joke from George Carlin. He said, when I was born, I was so stunned, I couldn't talk for 2 years. And in a way, birth, it's a massive trauma, because the womb is perfect intimacy. And then we spend decades of our lives making a journey back to being comfortable with intimacy again. I think when we see in young people, we see a very high romantic ideal. When they fall in love for the first time, I'm sure you've seen this when you felt it as a teenager. You fall in love and you think that this is the end of the world. This is it. I have finally met that other one. And it takes time to learn, oh, well, okay, we understand life has its ebbs and flows, and this relationship might not work out, and we'll move on from this, we'll learn. But there can be very high ideals about intimacy, like Romeo and Juliet. In real life, what would have happened to them? They probably would have gotten divorced, because that kind of intimacy is ultimately not sustainable, but it takes time to learn that, to learn its ways. I think as we age, intimacy becomes more comfortable, or more comfortable with its ways, and we can settle into it. But when we're young, that's difficult. That's something that just simply takes time and experience. The next point, insubstantiality. You might remember Reggie Jackson. Somebody said to Reggie Jackson, a reporter asked him, said, Reggie, what's your biggest struggle? And he said, tongue in cheek, he said, my biggest struggle is that every day I have to grapple with the magnitude of me. Well, when we're young, it's just the opposite. It's the insubstantiality of me, meaning asking the question, who am I? How am I going to leave this? How am I going to leave a mark on this world? The underlying fear is what's expressed in the book of Ecclesiastes, that is everything vapor and will I disappear? Jesus recognizes this, and he gives us some gentle reminders in the gospel that achieving things, gaining things is not going to necessarily alleviate this anxiety about insubstantiality and will I be remembered and how do I leave my mark? We also have wrestling with sexual energy. It's interesting, you see these boys come to Fordham Prep as freshmen, they're like little boys, and when they come back as sophomores, they're little monsters. It's like they have 3 times as much testosterone in their system. And the energy when they come in the room, they're overheated, they're awkward, there's acting out. It's because they get hit with that that energy that comes with puberty, and it's overpowering. I feel bad for them almost. And that's an energy that it does not let go until we die. It's always with us. And part of the task is making peace with it, making peace with sexuality, integrating that into our life in a healthy and whole way. In my notes, I put, so we can sleep at night and stay inside of commitments and channel that energy in a way that doesn't hurt ourselves or others. And that can take a long time to bring home. I think one of the risks for youth is that they split off their sexuality and it becomes a part of their life that is like, it's outside of their morality, it's outside of their emotions, and it's not a part that's integrated into their spirituality. One of the things I emphasize when I have these conversations with students at Fordham Prep is that the energy of sexuality is a spiritual energy. It comes from God. It's a creative power. And we're wise to treat it that way. I think in life, we're lucky if we can find someone, we can marry, have a partner who together we can make the journey of bringing this sacred energy of sexuality home and integrating it in a healthy way. And the final point I have here is a desire for moral rectitude. Young people like to take up causes. There can be a need to be right when we're in the first half of life. We feel this when we encounter somebody who has different political views than us, and we feel a need to correct them or convince them of our case, of our way. In worst cases, the shadow side of this energy can be young people joining religious cults or resorting to violence, like what we saw in Charleston and other places. That's the shadow side, but that energy is not recognized for what it is, and there's not a mentor or a role model to help somebody channel that. It can go dark, which is very dangerous. So that energy needs to be initiated. I think as we journey through life, we move from, like in the Hebrew scriptures, it starts with law, which is very much about, this is who we are, this is our identity. The law helps us know how we're different from others. Then it moves into prophecy, which is the ability for self-critique. I can look at myself and see my own shadow and where I need to grow. And then it moves into wisdom, the wisdom books like Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. And that's second half of life, but it's a journey. You can't go right from law to wisdom. You have to go through the whole journey of growth, developing the ability for self-criticism. And when one is ready, you move into wisdom. I think when we move into wisdom, we let go of the need to be right. It doesn't matter so much anymore who is right. We don't feel that need to show the other person how we are right and they are wrong. We can let go of zero-sum games and winners and losers in that way. What are the gifts of the first half of life? Wonder, meaning children have just this sheer awe for all creation. They have a million questions. They want to touch everything, see everything. And only they can, we all have that, but they have it in a special way. And that's their gift to give at that point in life. I remember when my little one was, he was maybe 4 years old. We were walking back from Seton Park here in Riverdale. It was the springtime. There were beautiful flowers growing up around a tree. And he stops and he says to the plants, he says, look at you, you're growing up so big and strong. You're doing a great job. Well, that's the wonder of a child. There's no self-consciousness, and he's just free to say that because he's so awestruck by this beautiful thing that he sees. Young people bring fire. This is what teenagers bring. You can feel it when sophomores come into a classroom. It can be unruly. It can be a little wild. You feel it at a high school dance. That's the energy of that fire that they're hit with, and when they come into their teenage years. For people in their later teens and early 20s, it's mystery and darkness. They remind us that there's a whole world out there that is just fascinating and so mysterious, and they want to explore it. It's a healthy thing when young people, they want to go abroad. They want to learn other cultures. They want to meet people other than themselves, who are different from themselves. That's a part of their desire to explore this mysterious world. And then as people mature a little bit, young people, they have visionary action, hope, inspiration. You think some examples, Mozart, he wrote all his best stuff in his 20s and 30s. The Beatles made the Sgt. Pepper album when George Harrison was 23. So that can be a time of life where they are touched by great inspiration. It's one of the gifts that they bring. And from that comes cultural renaissance. Let's just keep going. John, am I good on time? I'm good. Okay. So I'll get through the second half and then we can pause for some questions. Okay. The second half of life. What triggers us over to the second half? The great wisdom teachers tell us it's an experience of great love or great suffering. We have an experience of great love, which takes us beyond ourselves. It humbles us and allows us to see that we're living in a greater love that suffuses all creation. That's God's love. Something happens that puts us in touch in a mystical way with that power. It humbles us and it dethrones the ego. Or it could be an experience of great suffering. This is when the roof collapses and the walls cave in and we hit rock bottom and we realize I can't do this on my own. I'm not in control and I need God's help. Oftentimes for men, that will happen through a divorce, loss of a job, or alcoholism or some kind of addiction. Once again, when it all collapses and we realize there's no place else to turn but God, we experience a real spiritual poverty. And that triggers us over to the second half. And what are the struggles then and the tasks of the second half? The big one is dealing with wound and anger, naming our wounds and making the journey to forgiveness. When we're young, because of the energy of youth, we're able to suppress a lot of our woundedness, where Freud said that we're pre-neurotic until the age of 35. But then after that, the wounds and hurts of a lifetime just start to bubble through. And the call is to name those and to do our work and to let go and forgive. A great example of this comes from, you might remember the book and the movie Angela's Ashes by Frank Mccourt. It's a wonderful book. He has in the beginning, as he opens the book, he writes, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, you know, it's a terrible thing to be born poor. And he said, but it's even worse if you're born poor and Irish. But it's a triple disprivilege and a terrible wound to be born poor, Irish, and Catholic. You'll never recover from that. I remember Andrew Greeley, the late priest, sociologist and novelist, was writing a review of the book in Commonweal magazine. And Andrew Greeley says, Frank Mccourt said, the fact that you're poor, Irish, and Catholic are the only things that make you interesting, which is true. I mean, he made millions of dollars on the book and the movie just talking about what it means to be poor, Irish, and Catholic. And Greeley gave him his due praise for the book. And then he said, Frank Mccourt, he said, let me give you some advice. I'm going to read to you what he wrote. He said, granted, your life has been unfair. Your father was an alcoholic. Your mother didn't protect you from the effects of that. You grew up in dire poverty, and you suffered a series of many injustices under the Irish social services, the Irish church, the Irish educational system, and even the Irish weather. So let me give you some advice. Before you die, forgive. Forgive your father for being an alcoholic. Forgive your mother for not protecting you. Forgive the church for whatever ways it failed you. Forgive Ireland for the poverty, rain, and bad teachers it inflicted on you. Forgive yourself for the failures of your own life. And then forgive God, because life isn't fair. So that way, you won't die an angry, bitter man, because that's really the ultimate moral imperative. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I think the major task of the second half of life is to let go of wound and anger, so that we don't age in a way where we become bitter and we're holding on to resentments. We're not doing things like rehearsing hurts that happened 35 years ago. We're not calling up our brother and saying, remember back in 1976 when you acted like a jerk? We're still not nursing those. We're able to let that go. A part of that work of forgiveness is grief work, grieving over the wounds. We're all wounded in some way. It's not a question of are you wounded, it's what are the wounds. Naming the wounds, grieving over them, and letting go. Ronald Rolheiser says, we know we've done our grief work and we know we've made the journey of forgiveness, when we're not blaming somebody anymore and we don't see ourselves as a victim. We let go of blaming somebody else for our lot in life. Our next point, we dethrone ourselves in the second half of life to become the blessing grandparent. We don't have to be the center of attention anymore. The great elders are really a blessing presence. They don't have a lot to say, but just them being there brings something to us. It's like an old rock in the river. It brings character to the river. The river has to flow around it, and it wouldn't be the same if that rock wasn't there. I think ultimately this is what God is, this blessing grandparent. Doesn't need to be the center of our conscious attention all the time. It's not some kind of cosmic egomaniac, but rather blesses us, is like the mature grandparent who is there, who is present and always with us, and is a blessing presence. In the second half of life, we're called to simplify our language. When we're young, we need complexity. We need lots of books and doctoral theses on everything under the sun and explanations and lots of sophisticated words. In the second half of life, though, we let that go and we move towards simplicity. And we can see that in truly holy old people who have done this right, like Pope John the 23rd. He was able to say something as simple as, this is one of my favorite stories, on the opening of the Second Vatican Council, people gathered in St. Peter's Square that night, and they were calling for him to come out on the loggia. So he does, and he says, go home tonight and kiss your children and tell them it's from Pope John. And that's all he had to say, and everybody has tears in their eyes, because we just sense the beautiful simplicity and holiness of these people. Mother Teresa could come into an arena full of people and simply say, God loves you, and everybody gets it. And they all have tears in their eyes because they're so moved by this. Those are people who have reached a point in their life where they can say that, and just their presence and the simplicity of language carries so much power. Henry Nouwen, the great writer, priest and writer, he understood this well. He would, near the end of his life, he would rewrite his drafts for his books over and over, just to simplify his language, to make it as simple as possible. And our final point, final task, letting go of the need for achievement and simply taking our identity in God. Achievement is important for people in the first half of life. I couldn't give this part of the talk to my students at Fordham Prep because they're not ready for this. And I tell them, I say, it's important that you guys, you have to prove yourselves to yourselves. You have to develop a healthy ego. You have to show yourself and others that you can do it. You have to achieve something. That's how we build healthy self-esteem. But there comes a point in life where we let that go. Richard Rohr says, after the age of 30, success has nothing more to teach us. It's from our failures that we really learn. That's where we gain wisdom. But in the first half of life, achievement's important. We see what happens when people don't develop a healthy ego. That has consequences too. Of course, when the ego is too large, that's not healthy either. It can be large but thin, or it can be very small but weak. Ultimately, we want the ego to be small but tight. And I think as we move into the second half of life, we don't need to give the ego the narcotic of more achievement. It's nice if that happens, but that's not what we take our identity in anymore. What are the gifts of the second half of life? Wholeness, meaning we've moved beyond dualistic thinking. There's no longer a need to divide the field of every moment between up and down, totally right and totally wrong, with us or against us. That's how teenagers think. In the second half of life, we move beyond that to a place where we can hold contradictions, where we're more comfortable with ambiguity and paradox. And we see that being able to hold paradox is a part of the mystery of what it means to be human, and that we carry paradoxes with integrity until they take us where they need to take us. We can't always solve it or resolve it, and we don't need to anymore. We hold the questions rather than feel the need to come to definitive answers. There's wisdom. This is a perspective that comes with experience. Elders are characterized by wisdom, which is manifested in humility, generosity, compassion, and a willingness to accept the imperfections and shortcomings of life. And people are attracted to that. There's a groundedness and a beauty in that that attracts people. And I think that's a wonderful thing that in the second half of life, we can role model for younger people. And finally, what I call a cosmic perspective, they see the interconnectedness of all life. They value that, and they recognize the responsibility of stewardship for all people, for the earth itself, that this is all a part of a much larger mystery that we're all participating in. My final point that I'd like to share about this is that this is essential. These are unavoidable tasks that we're facing. These tasks of the first and especially the second half of life. We will all be called to do these in some way. Now, I think that we can either make a choice to begin to do these, especially work like letting go, forgiveness, our grief work, letting go of achievement. We can do that by choice, or we'll be conscripted to do it. And the draft notice will come when you're sitting in the doctor's office and the doctor says you have a cancer and you have 6 months to live. Or it might come in the form of you're having chest pains at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 2 in the afternoon, you're at the funeral home. And then you might be on the other side having to do this work. But I think that this is a part of what it means to be human, is to attend to these tasks. And we can do it by choice or by conscription. And I wanted to close with a little poem, just as Father Deveron began with a poem. I have a poem that for me captures these two halves of life with some beautiful words. This comes from Anne Sexton, The Awful Rowing Toward God. And here it comes. I'm happy I can share this with you. A story, let it go, let it come. I was stamped out like a Plymouth fender into this world. First came the crib with its glacial bars, then dolls and the devotion to their plastic mouths. Then there was school, the little straight rows of chairs, blotting my name over and over. And that's the first half of life, the order, the discipline. But undersea all the time, a stranger whose elbows wouldn't work. Then there was life with its cruel houses and people who seldom touched, though touch is all. But I grew. Like a pig in a trench coat, I grew. And then there were many strange apparitions, the nagging rain, the sun turning into poison. And all of that, Saul's working through my heart. But I grew. And God was there, like an island I had not rowed to. Still ignorant of him, my arms and my legs worked, and I grew. I wore rubies and bought tomatoes. And now in my middle age, about 19 in the head, I'd say, I am rowing, though the oarlocks stick and are rusty, and the sea blinks and rolls like a worried eyeball. But I am rowing, though the wind pushes me back, and I know that that island will not be perfect. It will have all the flaws of life, the absurdities of the dinner table, but there will be a door, and I will open it, and I will get rid of that rat inside of me, the gnawing, pestilential rat. God will take it with his 2 hands and embrace it. As the African says, this is my tale which I have told. If it be sweet, if it not be sweet, take somewhere else and let some return to me. This story ends with me still rowing. Well, in the words of Dwight Eisenhower, that's all I have to say about that. So I thank you, gentlemen, for your attention and indulging me, and I look forward to any questions or comments you'd like to make. I know I can always clarify things. I can always make it more clear, so feel free to ask me if it's something I can help with.